recording. Welcome to chapter 13, guys. We have chapter 13, chapter 16, and then we are done with managerial accounting for spring semester 2022. Woohoo! So differential analysis as it is used for making decisions. We're going to go through a couple objectives. We'll go through a couple exercises. I find the best way to learn this stuff is to just do exercise after exercise. So we're going to look at identifying what's relevant and what's irrelevant in terms of costs and how they can aid us in making decisions. Every decision involves choosing among a minimum of two alternatives. So the first step in making decisions is to define what are the possible alternatives that can be considered in this. Once we've identified what the alternatives are, then we need to look at the various data for choosing among them. And one of the best things to do is look at relevant cost and relevant benefits. Irrelevant costs and irrelevant benefits should not even be recognized in making decisions, only looking at those that are relevant. The key to effective decision-making is what we call differential analysis. We're going to look at future costs and future benefits that differ between the various alternatives. Apart from that, we're going to think of everything else as irrelevant and shouldn't be considered. A future cost that differs between any two alternatives is what we call a differential cost. Future revenues that differ between any two alternatives is what we call differential revenue. An incremental cost is an increase in cost between two alternatives. An avoidable cost is the cost that can be eliminated by choosing one alternative over another alternative. So we're coming up with a lot of concepts here. Differential cost is the difference between two alternatives. Differential future revenue is that differs between two alternatives, we call differential revenue. Then we have incremental costs and avoidable costs. Sunk costs will always be irrelevant. A sunk cost is a cost that's already been occurred and nothing's going to change it. Future costs and benefits that do not differ between alternatives are irrelevant in our decision making. Okay. Opportunity costs need to be considered in making decisions. And an opportunity cost is the potential benefit that's given when one alternative is selected over another. So in the example of a PSEO student choosing to go to school and kick butt and get free schooling, well, what do you miss out on? The social life that you obtain at your high school, smoking and doing drugs. And I'm kind of giving y'all a hard time. You get my point. And that should be a benefit. That's not the benefit, but you get the point. It's when you give up one thing, the biggest opportunity cost is going to school. What are you giving up? The ability to possibly work during that time that you are going to school. A potential benefit that's giving up when another alternative is selected. So here's an example of identifying what's a relevant cost. Cynthia, a Boston student, is considering visiting her friend in New York. She can drive or she can take the train. By car, it is 230 miles to her friend's apartment. She's trying to decide which alternative is less expensive and has gathered all the information. So if she decides the cost per mile. She can figure it out at 61.9 cents per mile. She's looking at the cost of gasoline, the annual cost of insurance, but is that relevant or not? The annual straight line depreciation of the car, is that relevant or not? The parking fees at school, 45 per month times 8 months, is that relevant? Do you see she's coming up with all these potential costs and she's trying to break them down in cost per mile. Got it? So she's looking at a $24,000 cost minus 10,000 salvage value divided by 5 years. So she's doing like a straight line depreciation on her car and coming up with that per mile. But what's relevant? Okay, so we've got these automobile costs based on 10,000 miles driven per year. Then we've got this additional information, a reduction in resale value of car per mile of wear, round trip train fare, benefits of relaxing on a train trip. Okay, we've got cost of putting the dog in kennel while gone. Benefits of having a car in New York, are there? To me, that looks like a detriment. Hassle of parking a car in New York, per day cost of parking a car in New York. So we've got all this information. We need to pick apart what's relevant, what's not. Which costs and benefits are relevant in Cynthia's decision making? The cost of the car has already happened, guys, okay? And it's not relevant to the current decision. Do I drive or do I take a train? The annual cost of insurance isn't going to be relevant either. Hasn't that already happened? Is that going to affect your decision? No. Then the cost of gasoline makes it pretty relevant if she decides to drive. If she takes the train, she would avoid the cost of gasoline. So that cost differs between the alternatives. Make sense? The cost of maintenance and repairs would be relevant. In the long run, these costs depend upon the miles driven. The monthly school parking, does that even come into play if she's driving or taking a train to New York? No, that's irrelevant because she's got to pay that if she drives or takes this train. So we see some of these average costs that she could put in that 61.9 cents a mile. Some are relevant, some aren't relevant. The decline in resale value due to additional mileage is a relevant cost if you want to get real picky for 270 miles, you know. The round trip train fare is relevant, right? That's going to be a cost if you do one alternative. If she drives, the cost can be avoided. Relaxing on the train is relevant, even though it's difficult to assign a dollar value. The kennel cost isn't relevant because she's going to have to put the dog in a kennel if she drives or take the train, right? Are you getting the picture here? The cost of parking in New York is definitely relevant because she won't need that cost. She won't incur that cost if she takes the train. The benefits of having a car in New York and the problems of finding a parking space are both relevant, but are difficult to assign a dollar value to. So from a pure financial standpoint, Cynthia would be better off taking the train to visit her friend. Some of the non-financial factors may influence her final decision. What are we using? Relevancy in the cost of driving, the gasoline, the maintenance, the reduction in resale, and the parking in New York. Okay. So the total relevant cost of gas maintenance, reduction in resale and parking in New York is $137.86. The cost of the train ticket is $104. Got it? Two alternatives. You have to look at the relevant costs based on the alternatives. Okay. The management of a company is considering a new labor saving machine that rents for $3,000 per year. Data about the company's annual sales and costs with and without the new machine are, here's the current situation, and then here's the situation with the new machine. So the current situation, our sales are showing right here. Our variable expenses, the difference here is the direct labor. Okay. Then the difference is the rent on the new machine down here. So data about the annual sales and costs with or without the new machine are shown here. As you can see, the only costs that differ between the alternatives are the direct labor cost savings and the increase in fixed rental costs. So we can look at this decision by looking at different costs and revenues and ultimately come up with the same solution. Decrease in labor costs would be at $15,000. The increase in the fixed rental expense affects you $3,000. So the advantage of renting the machine would be a plus $12,000. Make sense? Using, excuse me one sec. Using the different approach is desirable for two reasons. Only rarely will enough information be available to prepare detailed income statements for both alternatives. Mingling irrelevant costs with relevant costs causes confusion and takes the attention away from what's really important. Okay? So we're going to look at an analysis if we should drop a product line or a segment. One of the most important decisions managers make is whether to add or drop a business segment. Ultimately, a decision to drop an old segment or add a new one is going to hinge on its financial impact. So we've got to look at the costs. Due to the declining popularity of digital watches, Lovell Company's digital watch line has not reported a profit for several years. Lovell's considering whether to keep the product line or to drop it. So the decision, Lovell should drop the digital watch segment only if its profits would increase. So what's he going to do? Lovell's going to compare the contribution margin that would be lost if the digital watch line was discontinued to the fixed expenses that would be avoided if the line was discontinued. So here we've got, just on the digital watches, the sales, the variable expenses, and the fixed expenses. We've got a loss here of $100,000 on this section. An investigation, those revealed the fixed general factory overhead and the fixed general administrative expenses will not be affected by dropping the product line. So the fixed general factory overhead and the general admin expenses are assigned to this product but they can be reallocated to the other product lines. So are they relevant costs? In that case, the equipment used to manufacture the digital watches has no resale value or alternative use. What do you guys think? Should Lovell drop this line? I don't think so. Contribution margin lost if digital watches are dropped. 300,000. Less the fixed cost that can be avoided. We see the 260. So here you guys see, this is the disadvantage of dropping the digital products watch line. It's not what they thought from the start. The Lovell solution can be also figured out by preparing comparative income statements showing results with and without the digital watch segment. Here you see if the digital watch line is dropped, the company loses 300,000 towards the fixed expenses. You see that? On the other hand, the general factory overhead would be the same under both alternatives. So since that general factory overhead is going to be the same if we drop it or if we don't drop it, we're going to make that an irrelevant cost. Got it? The salary of the product line manager would disappear. So that's relevant to the decision. The depreciation has already, the equipment's already been bought, so depreciation's a sunk cost. The equipment's going to not have a resale value or alternative use. So that's an irrelevant decision. It's already happened. That's weird. Oh, it said that's weird. The salary of the product. Okay, so we said that would change. The depreciation is a sunk cost. The complete comparative income statements reveal that Lovell would earn $40,000 of additional profit by retaining the digital watch line. I don't know what I did to make that click on. Now, be aware that allocated fixed costs can distort the whole decision making. Lovell's manager may ask, why should we keep the digital watch segment when it's showing $100,000 loss? But it's because we're allocating some fixed costs to Lovell, it makes it look like we've got $100,000 loss. Including unavoidable common fixed costs makes the product line appear to be unprofitable, when in fact dropping the product line would decrease the company's overall net operating income. Make sense? So, you know what, let's just take a break here and go look at a problem. Okay. So here we've got the Regal. This is exercise 13.2. The Regal Cycle Company manufactures 3 types of bicycles: a dirt bike, a mountain bike, and a racing bike. Data on sales and expenses for the past quarter follow. So you see here, total sales, and then the breakdown between the dirt, mountain, and racing bikes. Then you've got your variable expenses to show with your other. You've got your fixed expenses, and here they're showing the racing bike has a $9,000 loss, okay? Management's concerned about the continued losses shown by the racing bikes and wants a recommendation as to whether or not the line should be discontinued. The special equipment used to produce racing bikes has no resale value and does not wear out. Okay, so what's the financial advantage per quarter of discontinuing the racing bike, or advantage? Should the production and sale of racing bikes be discontinued? And then what we'll do is prepare a formatted, segmented statement that would be more useful to managers. Okay? Take a minute and attempt this. What's relevant, what's not relevant? Okay. So what's the financial advantage or disadvantage each quarter of the racing bike? Sorry, let me get to the exercise. Okay, here it is. The financial disadvantage of discontinuing the racing bike is computed as follows. The lost contribution margin is $27,000. The fixed cost that can be avoided would be the advertising and the salary of the product line manager, which we know is 16. Okay, so we see the variable, you know, the net profit from the contribution margin here is 27. We can get rid of these 2 expenses, but we've still got to drop this line. It would hurt us 11,000. The depreciation of the special equipment is a sunk cost and is not relevant to the decision. The common costs are allocated and will continue regardless of whether or not the racing bikes are discontinued. Thus, they're not relevant to the decision. Another way we could look at it is the current total, and then the total if the racing bikes get dropped. We take our variable expenses and we take our fixed expenses here to show the effect of dropping this line would be a disadvantage of 11,000. Make sense? Got it? Okay. Now, do we make a product or do we go out and buy it? When a company is involved in more than one activity in the entire value chain, it is vertically integrated. A decision to carry out one of the activities in the value chain internally rather than to buy externally is called a make or buy decision. There are advantages of vertical integration. A flow of products, rather smooth. You can control the costs and the quality better, and ultimately then realize the profits. The disadvantages of vertical integration is that companies could fail to take part in the suppliers that can have maybe a cheaper product because these other companies can pool various more inexpensive products together. While the economies of scale factor can be appealing, a company must be careful to retain control over activities that are essential to maintaining its competitive position. I mean, everything's a trade-off, guys, you know? So here's an example of a make or buy decision. Essex Company manufactures part 4A that is used in one of its products. The unit product cost of this part is direct materials and labor and overhead, depreciation, supervisor's salary, and general factory overhead. So the unit product cost we see here is at 30 bucks per item. The special equipment used to manufacture part 4A has no resale value. The total amount of general factory overhead, which is allocated on the basis of direct labor hours, would not be affected by this decision. It's irrelevant. The $30 unit product cost is based on 20,000 parts produced each year. And outside suppliers offer to provide the 20,000 parts at a cost of $25 per part. Should the company stop making part 4A and buy it from an outside supplier? Well, here you see the various items here. If you purchase it from an outside supplier for $25, here are our costs of $30. So to make it 20,000 units, we would make it for $340,000. If we buy it, we'd buy it for $500,000. See how the avoidable costs associated with making this would be the direct materials, the direct labor, and the variable overhead, along with this supervisor salary. The cost incurred to buy the equipment has already happened, therefore it's sunk. To allocate that general factory overhead, remember, that wouldn't change this general factory overhead. It's allocated to all items, so that's irrelevant to making the decision, which is why this isn't included here. Should we make it or should we buy it, guys? We should continue making it, right? And opportunity costs are not actual cash outlays. An opportunity cost is the benefit that is foregone as a result of pursuing some other course of action. If the space to make part 4A had an alternative use, then the opportunity cost would have been equal to the segment margin that could have been derived from the best alternative of that space. Let's look at a problem from exercise objective 3. Okie doke. Make or buy decision. Troy Engines manufactures a variety of engines for use in heavy equipment. The company has always produced all of the necessary parts for its engines, including all of the carburetors. An outside supplier is offered to sell one type of carburetor to Troy Engines for a cost of $35 per unit. To evaluate this offer, Troy Engines has gathered the following information relating to its own cost of producing the carburetor internally. So here we've got cost per unit. Assuming the company has no alternative use for the facilities that are now being used to produce the carburetors, what would be the financial advantage or disadvantage of purchasing 15,000 carburetors from the outside? So, of purchasing them from the outside, here's to make it. To purchase them from the outside, we would buy them $525,000. Okay. The supervisory salary of $2 per unit can be avoided if we purchase the carburetors. The remaining book value of the equipment is sunk. It already occurred. So the depreciation would not be an issue in this matter. Okay. Should the outside supplier's offer be accepted? No. Suppose if the carburetors were purchased, Troy Engines could use the freed capacity to launch a new product. The segment margin of the new product would be $150,000 per year. Given this new assumption, what would be the financial advantage or disadvantage of buying 15,000 carburetors from outside suppliers? Well, here you've got, in that case, cost of purchasing, and then the cost of making, plus we would have that opportunity cost would become a relevant issue. In this scenario, you would want to buy the carburetors. So in that case, you'd want to purchase them. Okay, let's look at, how's everyone doing? Okay. Prepare an analysis showing whether a special order should be accepted. Special orders are one-time orders that aren't considered part of the company's normal business. When analyzing a special order, only the incremental costs and benefits are relevant. Since the existing fixed manufacturing overhead costs would not be affected by the order, they are not relevant. Here we have Jet makes a single product whose normal selling price is $20 per unit. A foreign distributor offers to purchase 3,000 units for $10 per unit. This is a one-time order that would not affect the company's regular business. Annual capacity is at 10,000 units, but Jet Inc. is currently producing and selling only 5,000 units. Should Jet accept the offer? Well, we look at our revenue, and then we look at our variable costs to see what our contribution margin is. To accept the order, we still benefit by 6,000. Okay. The answer assumes that the fixed costs are unavoidable and that variable marketing costs must be incurred on this special order. What about this one, guys? Northern Optical ordinarily sells the X lens for $50. The variable production cost is $10. The fixed production cost is $18 per unit. And the variable selling cost is $1. The customer has requested a special order for 10,000 units of the X lens to be imprinted with the customer's logo. This special order would not involve any selling costs, but Northern Optical would have to purchase an imprinting machine for $50,000. That becomes a relevant cost there. What is the rock bottom minimum price below which Northern Optical should not go in its negotiations without the customer? In other words, below what price would Northern Optical actually be losing money? Okay, that makes sense? What would be the amount? You take the variable production cost plus needing to buy that other piece of equipment, 150,000. If we're making 10,000 units, we'd have to, this is the very bottom number, $15 per unit. Let's do that one. Objective 4. Okay, special order decision. Imperial Jewelers manufactures and sells a gold bracelet for $189.95. The company's accounting system says that the unit product cost for this bracelet is $149 as shown below. The members of a wedding party have approached Imperial about buying 20 of these gold bracelets for a discounted price of $169.95 each. The members of the wedding party would like special filigree applied to the bracelets that would increase the direct material cost per bracelet of $2. Imperial Jewelers would also have to buy a special tool for $250 to apply the filigree to the bracelets. The special tool would have no other use once the special order is completed. To analyze this special order opportunity, Imperial Jewelers has determined that most of its manufacturing overhead is fixed and unaffected by variations in how much jewelry is produced in any given period. However, $4 of the overhead's variable with respect to the number of bracelets produced. The company believes that accepting this order would have no effect on its ability to produce and sell jewelry to other customers. The company could fulfill the wedding party's order using its existing manufacturing capacity. What would be the advantage or disadvantage of accepting the special order from the wedding party? So we would look at the cost per unit for 20. We'd look at the direct materials, the direct labor, the variable manufacturing overhead, and that special filigree, along with the special tool. Okay. So the advantage of accepting this order would be $449. The company would be better off accepting the order in that scenario. Okay. Now we're going to talk about constrained resources. Companies are forced to make volume trade-off decisions when they don't have enough capacity to produce all of the product and sales volumes demanded by their customers. In these situations, companies must trade off or sacrifice production of some products in favor of others in an effort to maximize profit. I'm so sorry. I'm yawning. When a limited resource of some type restricts the company's ability to satisfy demand, then the company's said to have a constraint. The machine or process that is limiting overall output is what we call the bottleneck, which is the constraint. Fixed costs are usually unaffected in these situations. So the product mix that maximizes the company's total contribution margin should ordinarily be selected. The company shouldn't necessarily promote those products that have the highest unit contribution margins. Total contribution margin will be maximized by promoting those products or accepting those orders that provide the highest contribution margin in relation to that constraining resource. So here we have Ensign, produces 2 products, and selected data are shown below. We've got the selling price of product 1 and of product 2. We've got our variable expense, our contribution margin, and the demand, and the processing time required per product line. Okay. Already you can tell product 1, the contribution margin's better per unit, can't you? Machine A1 is the constrained resource and is being used at 100% capacity. There's excess capacity on all other machines, but A1 can only do 2,400 minutes per week. Should Ensign focus its efforts on product 1 or on product 2? How many units of each product can be processed through machine A1 in 1 minute? Perfect. So product 1, which has a better contribution margin, does 1, but product 2, though it has a smaller contribution margin, they can do it 2 times. They can produce 2 to the 1 time of product 1. What generates more profit for the company using 1 minute of machine? It would be product 2, wouldn't it? Because product 1 takes twice the time. So in that case, they get $30 per minute versus 24 from product 1. Make sense? The constraint. The key is the contribution margin per unit of the constrained resource. Ensign should emphasize product 2 because it generates a contribution margin of $30 per minute of the constrained resource relative to only doing $24 of a contribution margin for product 1 with the same amount of time. It can maximize its contribution margin by first producing product 2 and then using any remaining capacity to produce the product 1. So the demand for product 2 is at 2,200 units, which gives us 1,100 minutes. But we've got 2,400 minutes available each week, so we can have time to produce at least 1,300 units of product 1, right? According to the plan, we will produce 2,200 units of product 2 and 1,300 units of product 1. That's how our contribution margin will look based on that information. You add them together, contribution margin is going to be 64.2. Determine the value of obtaining more of the constrained resource. Increasing the capacity of a constrained resource may lead to increased production and sales. But how much would Ensign be willing to pay for an additional machine, an additional minute for the machine A1 time? The additional machine time could be used to make more units, which had a contribution margin per minute of 24 bucks. So they would be willing to pay up to, not going over, but up to 24 bucks per minute just to break even. This amount equals the contribution margin per minute of machine time that would be earned producing more units of product one. Okay. Colonel Heritage makes reproduction colonial furniture from select hardwoods. The company's supplier of hardwood will only be able to supply 2,000 board feet this month. Is this enough hardwood to satisfy demand? What do you think?
No.
We've got 2 times 600 plus the 10 times 100. We would need 2,200. We've only got 2,000. The company's supplier of hardwood will only be able to supply 2,000 board feet this month. What plan would maximize profits? What do you think? So 600 chairs and 80 tables. Would be the contribution margin per board. As before, Colonial Heritage's supplier of hardwood will only be able to supply 2,000 board feet each month. Assume the company follows the plan we have proposed. Up to how much should Colonial Heritage be willing to pay above the usual price to obtain more hardwood? The additional wood would be used to make tables. Each board foot of additional wood will allow the company to earn an additional 20 bucks of contribution margin and profit. It's often possible for a manager to increase the capacity of a bottleneck, the constraint, in numerous ways: by working overtime, subcontracting some of it, investing in additional machines, shifting workers, refocusing business process improvement efforts, and reducing defective units processed through the bottleneck. So there are ways of getting around this. Prepare an analysis showing whether joint products should be sold at the split-off point or to be processed further. Okay. Some industries, 2 or more products known as joint products are produced from a single raw material. The point in the manufacturing process where joint products can be recognized as a separate product is the split-off point. A decision as to whether a joint product should be sold at the split-off point or processed further is known as the sell or process further decision. So here, petroleum, that's the biggest one for this type of process costing. For example, in the petroleum refining industry, a large number of products are extracted from crude oil, including gasoline, jet fuel, home heating oil, lubricants, asphalt, and organic chemicals. So, joint products need additional processing. The pitfalls of allocating here, joint costs are traditionally allocated among different products at the split-off point. A typical approach is to allocate joint costs according to their relative sales value at the end of the products. Although allocations needed for some purposes, such as balance sheet inventory valuations, allocations for this kind can be very dangerous for decision making. Joint costs are irrelevant in decisions regarding what to do with a product from the split-off point. These costs should not be allocated to end products for decision-making purposes. Okay. Sawmill cuts logs from which unfinished lumber and sawdust are the immediate joint products. Unfinished lumber gets sold as is, or it can be processed into finished lumber. Sawdust can be sold as is to gardening wholesalers, or it can be processed into Presto logs. So here we've got lumber and sawdust. Here's the value at the split-off point of the lumber and of the sawdust. The sales value after taking this lumber and processing it further is at $276. But here we've got our allocated joint product costs and cost of further processing on both sides. The final sales after the further processing, the sales value that was at the split off, here's that incremental revenue from processing farther. Okay, the cost of further processing. So you see here with the lumber, there's an advantage. But with the sawdust, there's not an advantage to further processing, is there? In this scenario. The lumber should be processed further, but the sawdust should be sold at the split off point. Okay. ABC, activity-based costing, can be used to help identify potentially relevant costs for decision-making purposes. Managers should exercise caution against reading more into the traceability of this than what really does exist. Okay, let's go and let's look at some more questions, exercises. Okay, so here we have exercise 3.6. Portsmouth Company makes upholstered furniture. Its only variable cost is direct materials. The demand for the company's products far exceeds its manufacturing capacity. The bottleneck in the production process is upholstery labor hours. Information concerning 3 of Portsmouth's products appear below: the recliner, the sofa, and the love seat. The variable cost per unit, and then the hours. Portsmouth is considering paying its upholstery laborers hourly compensation in addition to their usual salaries to work overtime. Assuming that this extra time would be used to produce sofas, up to how much of an overtime rate per hour should the company be willing to pay to keep the upholstery shop open after normal working hours? For just sofas here. So what we would do, here's the selling price, here's our variable cost with our contribution margin. It takes 10 hours to produce 1 sofa. So how much overtime? They don't want to pay more than $60 an hour or they're going to lose money. Make sense? A small nearby upholstering company has offered to upholster furniture for Portsmouth at a price of $45 per hour. The management of Portsmouth is confident that this upholstery company's work is high quality and their craftsmen can work as quickly as Portsmouth's own craftsmen on a simpler upholstery job such as the love seat. How much additional contribution margin per hour can Portsmouth earn if it hires the nearby upholstery company to make love seats? So we'll look at the contribution margin of the love seat, or the selling less variable contribution margin. It takes 5 hours. So they wouldn't want to pay more than $100 an hour, right? Is it worth it? They should accept the offer. The time would be used to upholster love seats. If this increases the total production and sale of love seats, the time would be worth $100 per hour, which is a net gain of $55 per hour. Okay? Let's look at the homework, guys. So, chapter 13. So basically, there's a single product called DAC. The company normally produces and sells 60,000 DACs each year at a price of $32 per unit. The company's unit costs at this level are shown. A number of questions relating to the production and sale of DACs follows. So they're giving you all kinds of detail. Basically, you've got to show various responses. Here is 1A, 1B, 2, 3, 4A, 4B, and 4C, 4D, and then 5. More importantly, the explanations. Next. Financial advantage requirement 1. T-bone should be processed further. Here's your explanation. 3. For 1, 2, and 3, here are your advantages and disadvantages. Okay. 4. Here's requirement. Here, I'm just going to give you these. This is all you need.